WFYI podcast brought to you by Bloomington, Indiana, an American college town offering food and drink, college sports, outdoor activities, live music, cool art, and good times daily. Everyone is welcome in Bloomington. More information at visitbloomington.com.
WFYI podcast brought to you by 45, presenting 30 years of music by the Mavericks on Saturday, August 17th at Rock the Ruins at Holiday Park. Ticket information at rocktheruins.com.
This is WFYI News Now. It's March 6th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, we've got just about 1 week left in the legislative session, so lots of stories out of the State House. We'll have an update on a bill about pregnant people charged with drug crimes, one about age verification on adult websites, another that hopes to make disaster relief funds easier to get, and Indiana Republicans are interfering in a lawsuit by the city of Gary against gun manufacturers and sellers.
I'm tired of Gary being dogged out, kicked to the curb, ignored, misused.
Those stories coming up, but first, politicians and educators agree that the large number of Indiana students missing school is a serious problem. From WFYI's education desk, Dylan Pierce-McCoy reports there's less consensus on what policies could help.
A bill making its way through the Indiana legislature reveals the disagreement over how to respond when students miss school without an excuse. At first, the bill called for more court involvement. Then it was overhauled to focus on early intervention for elementary schoolers. Now, a new provision requires schools to report truant students to the prosecutor. That drew criticism from some Democrats, like Representative Renee Pack of Indianapolis. She says families need support to get their children to school, not punitive policies.
We don't have to wake up parents. They're awake, and they're taking care of the kids, and they're doing the best they can.
The bill passed the House, but lawmakers will likely make further changes before a final vote. I'm Dylan Pierce-McCoy.
Lawmakers want to get pregnant people who have been charged with drug crimes into treatment earlier. A bill headed to the governor's desk would allow people charged with a drug crime to be referred to a forensic diversion program or drug court during their initial hearing. Drug courts and forensic diversion programs are meant to lower recidivism rates and address the underlying causes of crime. The bill would give judges the authority to refer a person after consulting with the prosecuting attorney during the first hearing rather than later in the process. The author of the bill says this option helps connect pregnant people to treatment earlier and reduce potential harms to the fetus. Adult websites would have to use stricter age verification to operate in Indiana under legislation headed to the governor's desk. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith reports on the final passage of a bill modeled after measures in other states.
Republican Senator Liz Brown says the legislation aims to protect children from adult content.
This is, by its nature, material that is harmful to a minor. And what we're saying is, if you don't have the controls in place, which the technology exists, then you're not going to be able to operate unless you put those protections in the state of Indiana.
The age verification required by the bill is either through mobile credentials, which the Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles doesn't offer, or through a third-party website. Democratic Senator Greg Taylor says it's a pipe dream that the bill will stop kids from being able to access adult content online.
This bill is going to do nothing but allow a third-party vendor to get your information.
Some similar bills in other states have been halted in court. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
Another piece of legislation headed to the governor aims to make Indiana's disaster relief program easier to access while providing more money for those in need. Republican Representative Michelle Davis says the State Department of Homeland Security evaluated its disaster relief program after a year of particularly dangerous weather in 2023. She says one change prompted by that evaluation was the need for greater flexibility.
Currently, Indiana's assistance program can only be used when the United States Small Business Administration declares a disaster for an impacted community. Removing this requirement gives Indiana autonomy over its own program to assist disaster survivors.
The bill also increases the amount individuals can get from $10,000 to $25,000. Other provisions in the legislation allow counties to use relief dollars for disaster mitigation efforts. In turn, counties that implement such efforts can get access to more funding after a disaster. And for our final story today, Indiana Republicans are interfering in a lawsuit by the city of Gary against gun manufacturers and sellers. Legislation sent to the governor yesterday is intended to end that lawsuit and ban any community in the state from suing the gun industry ever again. Republican Representative Chris Jeter says the state, through the Attorney General, should be the only one responsible for bringing government suits against gun manufacturers and sellers. There are two narrow exceptions in the bill. Local governments could sue over a breach of contract or a warranty issue if, for instance, they bought guns that turned out to be defective. Jeter says the Senate added the other exception,
which was for ordinance violations. So also now would allow political subdivisions to enforce their own ordinances on these entities. I think it's a reasonable approach.
Democratic Representative Vernon Smith, who represents Gary, says the bill is wrong.
I'm tired of Gary being dogged out, kicked to the curb, ignored, misused.
Final passage in the House was largely along party lines. That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Darian Benson, Drew Daudelin, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Abriana Herron. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.